Welcome to Maintainable, the podcast where we explore the art, and sometimes the mess, of software that lasts. I talk with seasoned practitioners who have spent years navigating technical debt, untangling legacy systems, and helping teams build software that can survive change. Because good software isn't just about shipping fast, it's about making it last. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, I'm joined by Joel Oliveira, an engineering manager at EasyCater with more than 2 decades of experience in the software industry. Joel joins us from Brookline, Massachusetts in the United States. Joel Oliveira, welcome to Maintainable.
Hi, Robbie. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Joel and I go back, for the audience's understanding, Joel and I actually go back quite a ways. I'm actually curious, before I ask my default question, do you remember where we met?
I do. We met at LessConf in Panama City Beach about 13, 14 years ago.
That sounds about right.
I think.
I can never remember if it was like before 2010.
Yeah.
There's like a fuzzy couple of years in my brain. But yeah, that I remember very much. That was a fun conference, I believe. We don't need to go into all the details of things that happened on that trip and necessarily, I'm not going to, but definitely was some interesting characters on that adventure. And I have not been back to, was it Panama City Beach? The mayor?
Yeah, that's right. Alan Branch's home, now the mayor of Panama City, which is incredible. But yeah, it's funny that we talk about that because there was a video that showed up not too long ago, like recapping that whole thing, which was a really great trip down memory lane. But yeah, it was a great time. And I'm still friendly with a bunch of people that I met from that conference. And I think that just goes to show the type of community that Alan and Steve were putting together for that. And I'm very grateful for having had that experience.
Likewise. And I also remember the mosquito bites from that trip. Pretty good in Alan's backyard. Now the mayor of the city, which is wild. All right, Joel. So what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Well, I have a feeling some of these things might have been touched previously, but I as software engineers, we have a lot of pattern matching that we lean on. My big one, and as a longtime Rubyist and someone who's written a lot of Rails code, I go back to predictability quite a bit. Knowing where things are and where to find things is something that I don't think that you can overemphasize when it comes to having a code base that you want to make sure is maintainable. The great thing about things like Rails apps is you can drop into it in any app for the most part and understand where things are going to be. It's predictable. You know where to find a business logic. Typically, you know where to find with the MVC pattern, the DHH style MVC pattern, you know exactly where to find things. And through the community, the evolution of what those patterns look like have grown quite a bit. You can go in the app directory and know between models, controllers, and views, helpers, and then things like query objects or decorators or command objects. One thing I kind of rail on a little bit is having a catch-all services directory. I'm not so much a fan of that, but if there are well-defined patterns, then, and things are predictable, then you know what can be done, where it should be done, and be pretty productive right off the bat. I think one of the things that I've had kind of like get off my lawn, old man yells at cloud reactions is when things like old JavaScript apps or Node apps, you can do whatever the heck you want, which is great. I believe in freedom of expression and doing things the way that you want. But as it relates to predictability, I think we kind of run against that when things are all over the place. But that's the first one I think I would point to, knowing where things are, tidy little neat spots.
Out of curiosity, what do you believe people tend to point as a signal of health, like maybe within our communities that you don't quite trust as much as they seem to?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Metrics, many metrics or vanity metrics, they are a measure of something. But in terms of quality and maintainability of the software, there are aspects that come with it to a certain degree, but end up in a bit more of a dogmatic realm than they do a practical, helpful realm. So you can have a lot of, perfect test coverage, but that doesn't mean that everything is put together very well. Retroactive test coverage can sometimes paper over or gloss over the architectural decisions that were made previously. That could be a bit problematic. I do subscribe. I love test-driven development from not again, to go back to the dogmatic word, but not out of dogma, but out of assistance of information gathering and leading you in the right direction. So I've always found that TDD was really great for understanding the problem, identifying an interface, identifying how it is we want to interact with the software. And as humans, I think it's paramount to understand the overlap between the technical and the human side of things. And things like TDD really help unearth the more difficult aspects of writing software. So things I would run into, like really difficult tests to write, sometimes lead you to the conclusion that the direction you're moving at is the wrong direction. And moving backwards to understand why something is so difficult to test has been helpful to me as someone who has written quite a bit of code. And if you're doing that retroactive test writing, then you're not utilizing parts of the benefits of why it is that we write tests in the first place. So vanity metrics like that are a bit of I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? A bit of a false flag, a bit of a bad smell, a bit of a not necessarily all that helpful to me.
I think it's one of those things that a lot of teams will be like, well, we need to measure it to know that we're improving the situation if we don't feel like there's a lot of, maybe not a high level of trust in their ability to make a lot of maybe seemingly sweeping changes, or they're like, well, we don't want to break this area of the application. We don't have that much touch coverage. So retroactively is like, what else are you going to do in that situation? But try to backfill tests, or at least put that on the to-do list or wish list that one day we're going to finally catch up on all of our tests. You're probably leaning a little bit more on the happy paths in that situation too, because you've probably lost context for a lot of the weird edge cases that you baked into your code there. Maybe not. I don't know. But I can also hear you on well, that kind of feels like then it's maybe a false flag or giving you false confidence when that's not actually the case necessarily. And you maybe lose out on some of the benefits of something like TDD. I'm curious if when those types of things pop up, because it's not uncommon. And actually, maybe this is a good segue to another thing, is that I know that you maybe pivot a little bit and talk about your career context, because I think that might help people listening understand where you're coming from. I know that you worked at a software consultancy for a number of years. Was that early on in your career, or was that like a second or third role in your career?
Yeah, so the Thoughtbot experience was later. That was in the later part of the first half of my career. So that was the last stop in my consulting journey before I switched over to the product side of things. So we could pretty neatly split my career into halves. The first half being a lot of time at agencies, digital agencies, ad agencies, consultancies. So working with clients quite a bit. Thoughtbot was the last stop there. I think at the time I was in my mid to late 30s at that time, and was about to welcome my son to our household. And I was getting tired. Consulting can be a grind, switching gears and switching teams, switching contexts, new code bases, new personalities, all of those things kind of put an end to my desire to be doing more consulting, even though I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was just the time for me to switch gears into the product side of things. And that's when I started jumping around to some startups and eventually ended up at EasyCater.
And I have to ask maybe a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek question. Is the grass greener in the non-consulting world? This is coming from someone that's been running a consultancy for, I don't even know how many years, 23? What year is it? 24? A long time. And so I don't know any different. So is the product world, do you like that there's a little less project context switching? You mentioned some reasons why it felt important to you at the time of your pivot in your life. And I'm also maybe a follow-up question that is there something about working in that sort of environment that it feels like separates you, maybe you don't feel that way at all, but like makes you a different caliber type of developer and now engineering manager than maybe people that didn't have that sort of experience?
Oh yeah, for sure. The answer to your first question, by the way, is the most trite, repeated answer to all software engineering questions with "it depends." The grass is not necessarily, it's greener in pockets of your yard, of that proverbial yard. There are parts of it that are definitely better and parts that are absolutely not. I miss the ability to pattern match and see those problems and do it better the next time than you did it the previous time. And the reps that you get from being a consultant are extremely valuable. The lessons I learned working on however many projects I did over the years, allowing me to work on those muscles over and over, were invaluable. Just incredible experiences. And knowing that I could take another swing at it again was always wonderful. I always loved that part. Let me take a step back. Young engineers, when I have conversations with young engineers and they say, well, what would you do? Like if there's anything that you would change, what would you have done differently? And very few things I would have done differently, but I would provide the context that working at consultancies will allow you to get those reps and do those things over and over again, which are incredibly valuable. But diving in and working at a product company will give you the ability to tackle problems at a particular scale that they would not have had the opportunity to do at a consultancy. So along with some of the other benefits, working at a consultancy, I will ask you, how often have you been on call, Robbie?
Hey listeners, it's Robbie here. You know, it wasn't all that long ago I'd find myself debugging a weird issue in one of our clients' Rails app. I log into one platform to track down the error, only to realize it was tied to some performance issue. And guess what? That meant hopping over into a completely different tool and trying to match things up based off of timestamps, if I was lucky. And let me tell you, my productivity didn't exactly thank me for that. Enter AppSignal, our podcast sponsor, and the tool that eliminates all that back and forth. They bring error tracking, performance monitoring, host metrics, custom metrics, uptime monitoring, and logging into one seamless platform. It's a single source of truth that helps keep your app running like a well-rehearsed symphony. Whether you're working with Ruby, Elixir, Node, Python, or tracking front-end errors in JavaScript, AppSignal has your back. They're always adding support for more languages and frameworks too. And here's the best part. AppSignal won't break the bank. Plans start at just $23 US a month. Plus, they're ISO 27001 certified and fully GDPR and HIPAA compliant, so your data is safe. Oh, and because you're a loyal Maintainable listener, you can use the promo code Maintainable at checkout for 10% off your first year. So head over to appsignal.com. Tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you and start making your app sing. Ooh, I mean, it's been a while for, admittedly, we have a team structure in place where I'm like the fourth or fifth person now, I think that gets called in a situation. But yeah, there was many years where I was waking up at 1:30 in the morning to deal with a client issue and to help out.
Oh, like you're on an on-call rotation for them?
In those situations, because we own the software projects for our clients. And so we're the only developers working on it. So if there's something going wrong, then our team is the one that picks up the phone or answers the phone call and deals with it or responds to the pingdom notifications or what have you. So that tends to be the type of work that we do. So we're a little less, we do come in and help companies with their own engineering teams, but historically, most of the projects, we are the engineering. They've just outsourced that. They're working on something else, and the software project is part of their business, not the business.
Yeah, maybe it's because of the types of companies that I've worked at that are typically bringing in consultants or have typically brought in consultants as staff augmentation. And when you're a staff aug, you're almost always not going to be thrown into a rotation, and that is a benefit of being in that role. Of the downsides, you could be pulled off that project at any time. And sometimes that parachute or that eject button being hit can be pretty jarring, but hey, on to the next thing. There's almost always a next thing. So that's the good thing about it. But when I talk about the opportunities as a consultant and as a product engineer, the scale of the projects that you get at a product company are very, very different. And you'll see a lot of very strange problems that you wouldn't typically see unless you're specializing in a particular area. But it's nice. The consistency in a role as an IC or a manager at a product company is good because you're thinking pretty long term, and investing over that long term feels pretty good.
All right, let's pivot. And I want to ground the conversation around a real project. So while getting ready for the conversation, I learned that it was a project where you replaced an old, I think it was an image cropping service that had become, I believe, hard to upgrade and was leaking memory. Can you walk us through what was happening and how you knew it was time to do something about it?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my favorite smaller to medium projects that we've had here. We had a home built cropping, like image delivery mechanism internal here that was a combination of a asset disambiguation service. So you gave it a name of like a crop, and then it would bring back a URL for an asset that had a bunch of query string parameters thrown in it. And the URL that came back was for another service that did the cropping stuff. And it was a node service. It was old and we could not upgrade it. We threw a bunch of engineers at it trying to upgrade it in a reasonable amount of time. And eventually the amount of traffic paired with a memory leak required us to restart that thing every day, sometime throughout the day, having to restart it manually. And it was just a huge pain. And having anybody have to do that on the weekends was not tenable. So we explored the options of re-platforming it to something off the shelf, either a product. So the age-old buy versus build thing, we decided at a particular time to build it, and it was time to either buy or find some better solution for it. So we did what we do, and we did some research and wrote an RFC and asked around for opinions on how we plan to do this. And luckily, we were able to identify a seam in our main application that allowed us to split between a new solution and the old solution. The beauty in that was, and I forget one of your previous guests, I forget, but somebody said identifying a particular seam in a piece of software and having that be the hook for where you can make the right change was paramount here. And we managed to track that down. And the final solution was was image proxy. So from our friends at the Martians, I forget their Evil Martians, yes. So from the image proxy project from Evil Martians, which is outstanding. Just a great little piece of software, Go service that we can throw pretty much anything at it, a S3 bucket, and boom, it just does the job and does it really, really well. So I, along with some of my other engineers, shout out to Ben, he and I worked together to write a internal Ruby gem that we could point via our feature flag service in either direction. So had a couple of adapters, one for the old image cropper, one for image proxy. And based on the amount of traffic, we could at runtime point traffic to one versus the other. And we were always guaranteed that we would get back an address that would get served to the user.
Does the image proxy handle cropping, or is it you had to add a layer on top of that?
It does, yeah. It handles cropping. It handles image format generation. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of image manipulation at a service level. So we deployed that to our Kubernetes cluster and scaled it out, and it just did the thing. And as long as we were passing the right data and we had a good overlap of information between our old service and this new one, combine those up into a little package of data. Through that, at both of them, we were able to get those URLs back, and everything just worked pretty seamlessly.
How would you talking about finding a seam in that sort of, without, you don't have to go too in the weeds there, but what does that kind of look like in reality there for maybe this particular type of examples you go in to dig into? Because a lot of people deal with probably images or assets in their software applications, and you're like, oh, we found a seam that we can kind of approach this with.
It was going completely outside in. Like we went from where the request was made and I just kept digging down in the layers of it. And we have GraphQL as our data delivery like method. And I think a lot of other companies probably do the exact same thing. It's the world that we live in. So in the stack through the graph where we are requesting any amount of data, some of that data was give me a URL for this particular, caterer, or this particular menu item, and return that back in the types that come back through. So digging through our types, digging through where everything was, luckily there was one object that was doing the heavy lifting of retrieving that URL and sending it back up through the graph. So that was the seam, luckily, that we were able to find where there was one responsibility. Here's the caterer, here's a menu image, here's the data that you have to work with, and go figure it out and then just return it back up the chain. And luckily, we're able to identify that. And luckily, there was little that was spread out too far, preventing us from getting that thing done. But it's just a matter of putting on your hard hat and going spelunking and finding that one good spot.
When you're evaluating tools, in this example, you brought up, image proxy as a viable option there. What sorts of things were you looking at, or indicators, or when you're evaluating maybe an open source tool, or maybe to buy something, piece of software to incorporate? What sorts of things are there metrics or things that you're looking at to get a sense of, like, is this the appropriate thing to bring into our world or not?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different levers, a lot of different ways to slice that up. So total cost of ownership in terms of reliability was the big thing for us. If we had decided to buy something and go with any of the half dozen to a dozen providers out there between like ImageX, Cloudinary, they're all over the place. So reliability and ability to do one job and do it well, that was the thing that we were looking for. So we could have gone with any of those commercial ones, but the decision was much easier when we realized how small the footprint of something like image proxy was and how well it lined up with our deployment process. It's a Docker container. You throw that out there and get that running and point everything at the right place. It just works. Small memory footprint, small compute footprint. There was really no reason why we should have used a commercial one. And that's not to say that maybe we won't get the commercial product of like the pro image proxy. But the biggest ones were, does it do all of the things that we need to do? We had a matrix of features and requirements. Additionally, because it's open source, they move a lot faster than the commercial ones. So at the time that we adopted it, they had support for both WebP and AVIF image formats, whereas the big commercial ones did not. So that made it a lot easier.
Was that something that you needed to roll out all at once, or was that something you could iteratively kind of roll out across your application?
We iteratively rolled it out across the application. We utilized feature flags quite a bit to incrementally switch things. And as we were writing that internal gem, it was important that we were able to divide that up at runtime, not at boot time, so that we could decide how many things that we wanted to provide to the users using the new tool versus the old tool. And thankfully, we're able to architect it so that it was pretty straightforward, getting the decision, the thumbs up or thumbs down at request time, whether somebody was going to be seeing the new image or the old one. So we were able to roll that out 1, 5, 10, 25%, and it just worked. It was a really pleasant experience to get that so that there was no downtime or no like big bang switch. I had a very smug smile on my face when we were able to get that working.
That's great to hear. I know a lot of say modernization efforts can get stalled during the process. What do you think helped this one actually get finished?
Pure stubbornness, I think, that we fit it in where we could. There was the rebooting the thing was really annoying, the rebooting that old thing, but that was manageable because we had been doing it for a while at that point already. So we were able to really trickle this out over the course of a quarter and get incremental delivery kind of running between the raindrops of all of the other feature work that was happening to get it done. But honestly, it was stubbornness, and there really was no reason why we couldn't do this. So we did our best to chop everything up into small bite-sized pieces that anybody could take on. And again, out of sheer stubbornness, I threw my own efforts at it, even though I'm a manager and shouldn't be standing in the way of merging in code.
I want to zoom out again. And, you've also described older systems as either, I believe was the way you described it to me, was fragile towers or maybe layers of sediment. So how does that mental model change how you approach legacy systems?
I think looking at software as an evolution, there are no decisions made in a vacuum. They're all dependent upon years of context and information. I think as a young engineer, I might have approached things from a much more like, oh, wow, this is bad, quote unquote, binary, and not thought about all of the pieces of context that have been lost to the ether, and having the grace to approach the difficult, thorny aspects of maintaining software makes it a little bit easier. I think that having a compassionate outlook for past you or past colleagues is pretty important to tackle these problems without getting too, not necessarily emotional, but clear-eyed about it. So with those kind of messy towers or layers of sediment, it's approaching it with here's what we know, here's what we believe to be true, and here's how we can move forward in chipping away at improving those systems. And through effort and planning and scoping, I think that a lot of that can be mitigated, cleaned up quite a bit.
We'll be back with our interview Joel in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robbie. I want to take a moment to say thank you for listening to Maintainable. If these conversations help you think differently about the software you're responsible for, please consider sharing an episode with a peer or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if there's somebody you think I should have on the show, shoot me an email to robbie@maintainable.fm. And now, let's get back to our conversation with Joel Oliveira. You mentioned like maybe thinking back to on when you're early in your career and might have had maybe a more of a binary outlook on this. And I think that's something that I think most of us probably have some, if we're being honest with ourselves, have that transitional thing. I feel like there's this, and I've noticed it within my own employees and staff over the years, where you bring people in and they get build up this like confidence over a couple of years, and then they're very, very opinionated about everything that we get exposed to. And then it starts to taper off in this interesting way where we're like, oh, all right, well, I don't need to be, maybe 3 years ago, I would have been like, this is bad. We need to rewrite this. We need to, how could anyone possibly ever work like this? And then 3 years later, they're like, no, there's no rewrites. There's no magical thing that's going to solve all these problems. We're going to end up back in a similar situation again, potentially. There's only things, how can we improve things from where we're at today? And that takes maybe getting through that. Or maybe some people, young people might be listening and be like, oh, you've just sold out or you've given up. And well, I don't know where that transition happens. I don't think I just woke up one day with like actually, I don't feel as strongly about that like I used to. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. But does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Things just get, that band of gray area just gets almost, fills up the entire space. The strip of white and the strip of black and the giant gray area in between, there's so much nuance and so much context and information that you have to take into account. And it just gets more broad, I think. So that absolutely resonates, not only from a software perspective, but from a life perspective. Looking at so many things as being good or bad is not healthy. And thinking about it from a greater context and looking at it from 100 different directions is where you have to approach the situation.
Do you use the metaphor technical debt very often with your team?
We use it quite a bit, yeah.
How would you define that at this stage in your career?
They are the artifacts of decisions that were made that at the time were the best with what we could do, that have been accounted, that we can now account for and have an opinion on how to approach rectifying, I guess. Maybe that's too harsh a word, but adjusting, moving forward. So technical debt, I've heard a lot of people say that technical debt, a pretty literal metaphor. You're willing to take on debt in order to pay it back later. And I would subscribe to that notion a bit, just to allow you to move forward, because software is an artifact. It's a liability. It's a means to an end, and the time to value is important, and being able to get something out there to the people that are using it is incredibly important. I'd say it might be the most important thing. So technical debt is something that you will have to willingly incur, but then thinking about it as pragmatically as possible, where is the technical debt that is holding you back or acting as an anchor, and how to move forward remediating that is something that has to be considered.
I'm curious if, thinking over your career and in particular about technical debt and trying to prioritize those things that are holding you back and advocating for time, budget, what have you, attention to those things. How do you kind of approach that now, or maybe thinking about how you might help engineers on your own team, because now you're in more of a management role? How do you guide people to like, okay, if we want to get this, we want to get time to do this. Here are some good ways to approach this. What are some ways that you've seen not work well historically, whether from yourself or from other people? And what do you think makes a better or stronger case for spending some more time and attention on improving situations like that?
Yeah, I think quantifying it is always a good first step. So understanding that the results of working on that technical debt will result in this improvement, this either time gained or defects lost, and presenting that to the people that you need to and advocating for that is a big one. Mental health of the people that are working in this is certainly a factor. Software is a human endeavor, ultimately, in my opinion. So making sure to weigh that in is quite important. But the data, the expectations of what will happen as a result, having a good justification, a great justification, if possible, is where you need to be. Not because I don't like how this pattern was deployed here versus not helpful. But it has to do with what comes out the other end of the equation there. So making sure that there's a solid foundation for why this is being done and being able to articulate that.
When I chat with different teams, something you mentioned, like maybe having some metrics that you could point to, but I don't know that all teams feel like they can kind of quantify those situations, because it is maybe more on the something in their gut, or they're just like, well, we know that we're having to work around this thing, but I don't feel like I could put a number to it. Like, oh, if we address this is going to allow us to move X% faster on other items in the backlog, what have you. Or maybe in your case, like, we're no longer going to have to deal with the daily reboot. Maybe it's as simple as argument to that. And some people are like, well, if it's only going to take 3 minutes a day to do that, then whatever, we'll just keep doing that, right? That's not necessarily the long-term solution there either. So trying to find that aspect of like, how do you persuade other people? But and the other part of this, I also think that engineers maybe don't always do a good job of discussing when those concessions or trade-offs are happening, when they're happening, because they're trying to help get something to market, help their product team get something out the door, what have you. And so the engineering team is kind of like in their own little vacuum of like, all right, ideally we'd approach it this way, but we only got 2 weeks. So this is what we can do for now. Maybe we can come back and see how this works, and we can revisit this. And then that conversation maybe doesn't happen outside of that engineering team. So that someone else, I'm air quoting, the product team that's less involved in the engineering, like, well, we're hearing all this news about all this tech debt and all these challenges, all these trade-offs we had to make. And we didn't know that any of that was happening, because those were all things that the developers were doing to themselves or to the project. So have you had any experience like that?
Nothing recently. I will say I'm fortunate to not have had that. We have a pretty healthy culture of communicating and over communicating, and have a good division of labor as it relates to feature teams and platform teams. So there is some cross cutting from some of our platform teams to understand where those proverbial like bodies are buried, and can raise those concerns where necessary. So everyone's pretty, front row has front row seats to where those things are. But the engineers here with us are encouraged to advocate for areas where they believe that we are being held back, and articulating that as such. They have a voice. Whether or not it gets greenlit, that's another conversation. But like you said, nothing exists in a vacuum, and making sure that everybody understands where the pain points are is pretty paramount.
You had just said that software is a human endeavor. And I'm curious about that particular use, that vocabulary there. What's the reality of how maybe teams are built and supported? And what this kind of makes me think a little bit more is about, like, what do you think gets undervalued when teams are hiring purely for, let's say, technical skill versus whatever the opposite of that, or the other things we get hired for?
I think each individual engineer has a particular magic or superhero, like superpower. And if what's mine, oh man, I don't know. I love people. I do love people. I love making sure that people are doing their thing and are challenged. I think it's really important to double down on making the entire experience really great for engineers. And each individual engineer is different than the next, and finding the right levers and motivation for each one of those is as important to me as deciding what the technical solution to something is. But for building these teams is understanding how some of those parts fit, and not to lean too heavily into the sports metaphor, but there are a lot of teams that might not have as talented individually, like players, but as a whole, it is much greater than the sum of the parts. One of my teams, the growth engineering team here, I would say that each individual there brings something different to the table that makes everything so much better and so much easier to get things done. One of my engineers is just a heads down, get things done person. Another engineer knows the ins and outs of all of our systems. Another engineer really likes tackling really meaty, interesting, difficult problems. And another engineer has a great organizational mind, helping me lead and drive things through good processes. So put all of those things together individually, sometimes it feels like the Chicago Bulls in the 1990s and things just really click. But being cognizant of that and understanding what each person needs and wants out of the agreement and getting out of their way will end up working pretty well from the human perspective.
You know, as you move from being a full-time contributor engineer into management, you touch on already about like just enjoying the people part of that process. But what was maybe one of the hardest things to let go of?
Oh man, just having that time in your head to really crank on something. I do miss that, but that particular corner of your brain, you can find ways around that and scratch that itch. Working on side projects or small projects or tiny little things that you have some institutional knowledge about, as long as it's not in the way, you can find areas of that. And I think I recognized after the first year or so that where my contributions would be best served are on the people and cross-functional communications side of things rather than on the technical side. I joke, and it's self-deprecating, but I'm not the best engineer in the room. I've never said that I was the best engineer in the room. And some of that is just my natural willingness to lean on self-deprecating humor. But from an objective perspective, let the experts cook and get out of their way and do everything you can to make everything else around them a better situation. And you'll get dividends out of that. And I think that that's how I approach, as a manager, that's how I approach things is making sure that I'm fixing the problems they don't need or want to fix so that they can concentrate on the things that they enjoy.
That makes sense. Do you recall if there was any transitional phase where you would still maybe volunteer to deal with something that was maybe in the code or in the projects? You're like, oh, I'll handle that just to get something out of the way rather than passing it on to someone else. Was there a period where you just had to be like, I need to let go, and just share, delegate, have other people do?
Yeah, I think after seeing myself take a long time on a particular thing that would normally take me half a day, and a particular task being kicked, like I'd say like the can kicked down the road, sprint to sprint. And after seeing that happen a couple times, that's when you just got to take a step back and say, nope, this is not where the value is for me as an employee. And hey, everybody, when it makes sense, maybe I'll do some of this stuff. I can certainly pair with people and provide them that. It's a nice forcing function to get on and pair with somebody to move that thing forward. But whenever something moves over into the next chunk of time, then that's when I have to revisit whether or not I'm the person to be working on that.
I would imagine there's people listening that are probably in a similar period of their career where maybe they made that transition and they're still trying to tackle things and things are moving slowly. I think that is a really good example of thing to look out for and decide, is this okay for the organization? Is this just scratching my own professional itch of wanting to still be someone involved? And if I'm not finishing these things, then is that detrimental to the rest of the team or not, versus letting them have those opportunities to work on those things themselves and getting, as you said, let the experts do what they're good at and try to stay out of their way. Do you feel like you worry about getting too disconnected that you wouldn't be able to jump back in? And so how do you keep your muscles somewhat ready to go if you needed to be called upon? Or is it okay to actually just be like, you know what, I don't do that. I don't need to be training for a half marathon that I may never actually have to go out and do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Some of this is forced on me, Robbie. Some of this is just by the nature of the types of teams that I've inherited. Both of the teams that I run right now are primarily front end focused, and we're a React front end and Rails back end side. So some of it was just, hey, buddy, you are not the expert in the room, not even close. So it's easy to stay out of the way. Sometimes it's frustrating to not be able to pop in and have a more technical voice of authority in some of those conversations. But that problem is pretty easily mitigated when everybody else in the conversation is more than capable of taking care of everything. But when there are corners that require somebody with a little bit of that secret sauce, a little bit of that knowledge on this old system, then I am happy to jump in and be like, "Oh, I know this one. Hey, I have done a thing or two in the past. This old dog still knows a couple tricks." But it's these days it's mostly out of necessity. I kind of very stubbornly didn't jump on that React single page app train, 10 years ago or so, much to my detriment. I'm lacking in the expertise in that particular corner to have a strong voice on our teams, but it's totally fine because everybody on my team is heavyweight in that arena.
How do you balance you have an organizational goal of thinking about your tech stacks and the tools that you're using there, and also balancing the members of your team needing to think about their professional development and balancing, let's go try experimenting with some new frameworks and new tooling, but also this is the stack that we're kind of focusing on at the moment. Like, are those things that you're having to actively kind of ongoing think about that and talk about with people? Like, okay, let's experiment here, but let's not deviate too much because we still as an organization have to maintain everything that we're producing.
Yeah, one of the things that I bring up often is framed around opportunity. So understanding where the overlap exists between the ambitions of somebody and where the opportunities are that present themselves. So understanding where people want to be 6 months to 2 years from now, and identifying when those opportunities come up to point them in the direction head first at tackling some of those things. So that comes from communication, that comes from very diligent, honest, and open conversations with people. What aren't you getting now that you want to get? Where are the areas that you want to invest in to further build up the corpus of your body of work? And being very intentional about pointing people in the direction that they want to and need to go. And it's always a conversation between where I think there needs a little bit of polish on the corners of some rough edges and where they think, no, I really want to try doing more of that thing. And sometimes that requires, hey, there's an opportunity on that team over there. to do more of that thing. Would you consider moving over there to get more of an opportunity with that? Not my favorite conversation, but you have to think about the person first before.
Are you more often on team refactor or team rewrite?
Ooh, good question. I'm more on team refactor.
When do you think a rewrite is appropriate?
It's appropriate when it's faster to do it and use the existing body of work as a requirements gathering exercise. Like we know what we need from that thing, and scoping everything out, identifying how long something might take. And these days it might take even less time with the LLM tooling that we have available to us, not recklessly, of course, but sometimes you don't want to get too caught up in the sunk cost fallacy. Like you don't want to be too married to the idea of let's just refactor it. And sometimes just teams aren't available to do it. And if there's no one maintaining that thing and there's no institutional knowledge, maybe we just break ground on the new application that aligns more closely with our current tech stack. Sometimes it's just, again, it's a conversation and understanding what the trade-offs are between it's going to take us 3 months to do it in a completely different thing with a rewrite, or it's going to take us 6 months to do it by very diligently, slicing these things up into different projects. But yeah, I try to lean more on the let's make this thing better instead of let's rewrite the whole darn thing.
Hey folks, it's Robbie here. It's early 2026, and for a lot of teams, this is the year they finally want to get ahead of that growing backlog, those bugs that keep piling up, and the upgrades that never seem to make the sprint. If that sounds familiar, Planet Argon might be able to help. We offer team augmentation for organizations that need to move faster without the pressure of hiring full-time employees. We work with technologies like Ruby on Rails, Laravel, Vue, and Next.js, just to name a few. And here's what we believe. Good software deserves a second act. So if your app is still delivering value, but needs a little bit of cleanup, some care, TLC, or a few extra hands, we'd love to help your team make a real progress this year. Visit planetargon.com. That's planetargon.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Have you found that there's some good patterns for encouraging your team to go? Are they actively looking for things to refactor? What's that workflow kind of look like today? Is it like log something, you have a backlog, or tech that backlog, or things that annoyances? Like how does your team thinking about that and then decide when you're going to spend time tackling those items?
Yeah, we look at where the biggest anchors are, the things that are keeping us from doing things, the pieces of the puzzle that just won't go away, and then planning how to do that and tracking it. I think the tracking of paying down all of that old debt is pretty important. Giving people the insight into what it is that exists and how the process is moving along. I wrote a bunch of, actually, I didn't write it. I had Claude help me write a bunch of scripts that ran static analysis on a bunch of code bases that said, hey, these are the number of legacy components that we're using. These are the number of imports that we have using this old library or that old library. And as we work through our roadmap, incrementally chipping away at some of those old components in favor of newer, more modern components, then we see those numbers going down. We also do our best to say that something is a temporary fix and account for it in the backlog so that we know we need to take care of that thing. Encouraging each other, we hold each other accountable to say, hey, if we're going to do that, then we absolutely need to account for that for down the line. So that keeps the proximity of the thing, the decision that you're making, the ramifications of it, and the way that you're going to address it as close to you as possible. So the ability to keep that information as close to you as possible and then take it down. Our A/B tests, we have a very rote process. We have a setup, we have a teardown. And as part of a teardown ticket, we have all of the things that we know that we need to do so we don't lose any of the steps that are required to make sure that controller treatment gets thrown away at the end of the thing. So it's a very process-driven aspect. That's on the feature team that I work on, the growth team's processes, and on the front end platform team, that's all we do. We account for all of the things that need to get fixed and improved, and we have a kickoff pre-quarter. We identify what those things are, and we just put our head down and just not rush through, but really very intentionally, very confidently roll through all of those things and make it a better experience for the engineers that are using that on the other side of all of that. So it's their responsibility to kind of like pay down all of that debt. And it's satisfying. I think it's satisfying for everybody.
Just make sure I understood that. So like if you're doing like a A/B test on something and there's different ways of how that would work, and then one of those paths, say, wins or seems to be working better, then you got to go clean up option A because B was working better. So there is a process to remove, tear down, clean up what you had done. So that way that stuff's not lingering in the future. You don't end up with like 5 more variations on top of just B itself. That seems really healthy. So that's great. Joel, so I'm curious, so let's assume that there's hopefully a few people still listening to this podcast. I know you're out there, but a lot of them are working on projects that they didn't build initially. They've come into an organization that already built some software, and there's probably some tech debt, or there's probably some old dead code, or, some legacy decisions that are haunting them and slowing them down, or there's those daily reboot type situations. But maybe, just maybe, they're listening to this and they're thinking, that sounds great, but I'm not in a position of authority to just start prioritizing things. I've only been here for 6 months, and I'm trying to figure out how I can get some sway with my coworkers or management to prioritize some of these things. What are some tactics or strategies that you would encourage them to think about so that they could start potentially making some impact before the end of the week of them listening to this episode?
Yeah, I beat this drum constantly. I know I mentioned it earlier, but opportunity, like there's opportunity in everything. And if you see a whole lot of technical debt and you have a strong opinion on how improving something or improving a system, it might not even be technical debt. It just might be there's a better solution to that might give everybody better tools to do their job or make it faster to deliver something. Finding those opportunities and advocating for it. Having conversations, identifying it, having artifacts around it, writing documentation, saying that, tracking exactly what it is that is happening as a result of the deficiencies that you're seeing. You can complain about it, but then it comes off as a complaint. But if you come at it from an area of opportunity and optimism, hey, there's this thing that is slowing us down. And I think that if I am given this amount of time to work on that, we will see the benefits and the results of making those changes. So part of it is a political thing, and getting out there and having those conversations with stakeholders, knowing that it might not pay off, you might not be able to do it, but not losing sight of what those things are and documenting it and having a means of advocating for it instead of passing conversations is something to do. And sometimes you might end up having a reputation of, hey, that person knows the systems inside and out. They've done enough work here. They know where there is opportunity for improvement. I trust that their analysis of the situation is going to help us in the long run. So we're gonna try and make the room for them to work on that. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to have an opinion and be able to back it up. So the data and being able to track it is the important little kernel there.
But Joel, I'm actually the person that's been there for 5 years now, and this new person is saying, hey, they're super enthusiastic, excited, and want to work on these things. But I have seen this happen over and over and over the years, Joel, and we'll spend a couple of weeks or a couple of months on a Git branch, and it doesn't get finished, and we just got to live with this reality now, Joel. So what are you telling these people to do this when we know that's not going to work, Joel? What do you say to that person? Get out of the way.
Why so negative? Maybe what if it's smaller? What if the thing that we're proposing is step 1 out of 20? And stacking those bricks in service of that final goal is what we need to do. It doesn't need to be this big bang kind of like take a huge bite out of the issue. Small things adding up in aggregate lead to pretty outsized results. I try to tell my son that all the time, like practice and 1% improvement every day just builds up to quite a good body of work. That whole Kaizen mindset, incremental improvement every day just builds up to a nice body of work. I think that's what I would say to that person, that negative Nancy over there, Robbie.
I appreciate that. No, that's a healthy perspective. You are a very wise and mature human being, Joel. So thank you for that. Everybody listening, let's get over ourselves, everybody. I've been that person a few too many times, and I'm the person that runs it. I'm like, no, we're not going to build a new software projects for this thing. Nope. I don't want to spend the time and energy on it, but just do it. It'll probably be fine. All right, Joel, a couple quick last questions for you. Is there a non-technical, non-software book that you find yourself recommending to peers?
Indeed, there is. One of my favorite books from the last 6 years. We had a book club at work, and the managers all got together and read this book called Thanks for the Feedback, which really, really opened my eyes to a large part of the people side of not only work, but life in general. As a young, sensitive kid, I would often mistake feedback for criticism or criticism for feedback. And looking back on my path to where I am right now, I actually went to school, to college as an art student. And the transition from what was a hobby and something I considered myself good at to career path, trying to build the path to a career in art or illustration, I could not handle the critique aspect of that. And I understood all of that as these people hate me and the thing that I'm doing, whereas I should have been more along the lines of these people want to make me better and they're telling me how to get better. And that book really opened my eyes to the different styles of feedback that exist. And I'm able to use a lot of the strategies and ideas that come from that book in my day job, working with people and making sure that they're understanding where I'm coming from and that the perspective that they're getting from not only myself, but from other people come from a pure place, and want them to be better and do better and get stronger. So I really love that book. Outstanding. Have it here. Let me see if I can find it.
I'm looking that up now, and it looks like it's the author is Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback Well.
Yes, that is the one. That is the one. I have it here somewhere in my pile of books and stuff. But that's highly recommend that. And I would recommend that to not only people in business, but in their personal lives as well. I use a lot of that with my son almost constantly. And whether or not it's making its way in there, I am not sure yet.
Do you feel like it's helped you more on the reception of feedback or on actually giving feedback?
Both. I've come to learn that feedback is a gift. And even when it's really tough feedback, when you say something that comes off the wrong way and somebody says, "Why did you say that? Can we talk about why you said that?" The initial instincts had previously been to be defensive. And after that, it's let's interrogate what it is that has caused that particular reaction and understand from someone else's perspective why it might have come off the wrong way. And I find that it's truly a gift to be able to put yourself in the shoes of another person and understand where they're coming from and use that opportunity to improve and be better. Empathy is something that you can't invest in enough in all aspects of one's life.
Well, I will definitely include links to this in the show notes for everybody and probably pick up a copy of myself. This might be good timing for me, actually. It's a good start of the year. Maybe this might be one of the first non-fiction books that I pick up for myself. So thanks for that, Joel. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering online?
I do have a neglected website at myfullname.com, joeloliveira.com. Every once in a while, I'll pop in there when the motivation strikes. Other than that, I am in the ruby.social Mastodon instance at Jayroh, Jayroh, and a little bit in Blue Sky. But other than that, I'm often kind of hanging out in the random siloed Slack instances that exist out there, like Nate Berkopek's performance Slack and others. But yeah, that's where usually you can find me.
Awesome. We'll definitely include links in the show notes for everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us on Maintainable, Joel. It's been a really thoughtful conversation.
Thank you so much, Robbie. It is an honor and a pleasure, and I'm really appreciative of you and thankful that I got to meet you 12, 13 years ago. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
You've been listening to Maintainable, a Planet Argon production. Editing by Claudia Armbruster. Post-production by Autumn Morgan and Ella Svensson. Emotional support from the letter M. For Maintainable, for momentum, for making things better. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Keep showing up. See you next time. Maintainable.